I'm
Marla,
all I'm all up for laughter.
everyone always says this at the beginning of things, that they're super excited, and I'm super excited a lot of the time, but I've been a little bit nervous um, about our conversation, but I'm sure everything's going to go swimmingly, as they say.
I
So
don't
yeah,
doubt.
so grateful to have you here and for some time together.
Thank you, Darren. I really appreciate your invitation. Thank you.
My deep pleasure and honor. I have recently finished a cursory, a rather rapid reading of your book, and I was astonished at your skillfulness and the humanity of your writing. It encompasses a life and the features of your childhood, your upbringing, your development as a woman, as a human, as a being, as a mind, so beautifully. And as a writer, I was deeply impressed.
Oh,
It very much captivated me.
thank you. Thank you.
There was nothing chore-like about that experience.
Well, thanks. I have to say that writing a memoir is one of the most indulgent things anyone could ever do. But for me, it was a healing journey to share those stories. But what I found out in the 6 years that it's been out is that people really resonated with it because they saw themselves in the book. That's why I basically wrote it, to get people to see their own journey, to see the difficulty of the trauma, the drama, and the transformation. So it means a lot to me that you said what you said. So thank you.
I definitely had that experience as well in reading it. It made me reflect in new ways on my own history, development, thought, concern, trauma, drama, all of the things you mentioned. So it's a beautiful and very heartful mirror. There's every aspect of what we might hope for. There's like trouble and confusion and storminess and revelation and reflection and revision and forgiveness and transcendence. Um, it's a beautiful paean to the arc of a human life and how it escapes the traps that may seem to surround it in its origins. So amazing.
Well, that's quite a review, and it's also quite an active. I like to look at active thoughts. Like I've been working on with people because I now do the work that I do constantly, and that is actually helping people with their own trauma and drama into the transformation for whatever reason. But I've been working with the statement, "I choose love," which actually has a resonance with it. So if you don't mind saying it with me, or on the count of three, saying it together, because I want you to tell us what saying these words mean, because it shifts us in some way. It's a choice. So you're asked, I'm not making you do it, but I'd like for you to do it with me and see what happens. Okay.
Absolutely.
On the count of three. One, two, three.
I
I choose love.
It's funny, there's a technical issue with Zoom, which is that we cannot both speak at the same time. Um, I feel choked up.
Me too.
I have to work not to cry right now, and that feels fine and good.
Mhm.
Um, I'm grateful for it. It's not merely a reminder, it's a kind of a resurrection, right? It's a resurrection of my heart, my innocence, the original um, purposes that I think drew me into incarnation. And as children, these features of our, I think, both our previous being and our future being, they are alive in the most astonishing and vital ways. And over time, um, as we undergo the processes of enlanguaging and enculturation, which are extremely confusing for children, I think, and really don't make sense. Uh, Many of those initial, the character and the spirit of our origin, they get occluded. And really, this is perhaps a fundamental feature of trauma, is how those occlusions are introduced and how they are sustained.
Well, as you know, and your audience doesn't know this, so I'll just give a little background, but I'd worked as an actress for 25 years, and I was stalked by someone, and my antennas blew out of my head and they never went back down. But in the process of all of it, in writing the book, it really was a reflection. It was an understanding that the purpose of my coming in was to make a difference, which is usually what most of our purpose is. But the former lifetime before this one kind of came along with me. And because of what's going on in our country right now, I'm just going to share with you the idea of what that was. You and I met because of a very famous podcast that has been going on for many, many years with Whitley Strieber. And I was a co-host of that program for basically 10 years. But the dynamic of the bleed through of the former lifetime is a little, I didn't talk about it in the book much, but the dynamic was having experiences with Brian Weiss, who's written Many Lives, Many Masters. He's written 9 books. He's basically the father of past life regression. And my experience with him had me accessing different lifetimes. And this last one feels as though I was in the camps and I didn't know which camp I was in. It just was during the Holocaust. So the dynamic of that was being in a room with a doctor who basically said he was going to do something to my arm that would either make me very sick or it would kill me. And dying's not a problem. It's literally living, right? Living is the issue. The dying is easy because I remember feeling his feelings, the nurse's feelings, my own feelings. I could feel the dynamics before I was actually leaving my body. And as I'm leaving my body, I heard myself screaming, "Your hate will not destroy my love."
What a beautiful medicine you make in the world, in my own heart right now. Just so profound. Um, I'm an unusual chimera because I'm very intellectual, and often that means unavailable to emotion or sensitivity or empathy. But in my case, I sort of have both wings, even though I lean into the intellectual one because it feels safer. Um, I read that story, and it's hard to imagine the sense of that young girl in that situation without really just kind of losing it. Her aloneness, the the catastrophic distance of a caring, loving, protective presence, right? How that's just been completely evicted from this scene. And it's almost as if she's literally with demons, right? And still the courage of her heart.
Well, what I've learned in the last 14 years, because I've been looking through the lens of science, at work at being a psychic and being a medium, all of the cliche terminology out there. That's why I call myself transformational consciousness coach. But I utilize the terminology on the book as calling the book American Psychic, understanding that the the basis from which we all come is a foundation that is born out of blood, and the elevation in our consciousness here on this lifetime, we had to do this ourselves, Darren. We had to do this, and we had to take our own path and be hidden for as long as we could be hidden, and then come out when we needed to come out. I mean, what's more, I mean, I was living in a world of make believe for so many years because that's what would help my mother try and love me. Anything to make her happy, which was basically getting on stage or getting into the television to so that she could cloak herself with my successes, as many narcissists and ill people will do. That's how I lived in order for me to express myself. And that's one of the things about trauma. It's one of the things that I had mentioned to you I wanted to talk about was healing the dynamic of whatever abuse was going on in anyone's life, whether it was like my father came back from World War II and became an alcoholic. My mother was crazy. You know, the children of war-torn families, we're just looking for love. Hey, hey, love me, love me. Oh, I'll get you a drink. You'll love me. Oh, I'll go on to TV so I look good and you can be happy about that. That's what I'll do. We all morph ourselves into trying to be loved, right? That's what we want. And as adults, we are now owning that, loving ourselves, and helping others find that journey for themselves.
There's a in human existence, it's as if we are metaphorically we are walking in a metropolis of skyscrapers of the absence of humanity, and they're like these leviathans, and often one some of the leviathans are our parents, right? And the irony is that we naturally seek their approval and love when the surface they present to us may be evacuated of all that we hope for, but in their interior there is this unquenchable adoration of us that we cannot sense. It's this occlusion again, right? And so the love is there. What we're seeking is sort of its affirmation or validation or verification. And then the parents are often so resistant to demonstrating that when they are, right?
Yeah.
Many parents aren't. Everyone's life situation, path, origin is unique. I honor that, and yet nearly all of us have these sort of clogs
Mhm.
in the flow of our heart and our desire for the adoration of our parents. And it strikes me that part of what we're seeking is, I mean, there's a huge backstory here. Like
Yeah.
something comes with us into birth. I don't have to say exactly what it is, but it's not ordinary. It's an intelligence or a family of intelligences, right? And then as that becomes occluded, we transfer the expectation of that companionship, that reassurance, that encouragement, that acknowledgement. We transfer that onto our parents. And now, it's like you said, death isn't really the problem. Getting born, now you're going to have some trouble.
They're living. Well, this is really great PR for reincarnation because as I've discussed with many of my clients and friends, how could we know that something was wrong in our family at such a young age unless we had lived before? It's like I remember holding onto the sink in the bathroom, screaming, being very angry at my situation, like being mad at God. Mad at God. What the? F am I doing in this family? What the hell is going on? And realizing that I come from someplace else where there's benevolence or some other awareness, and okay, here I am. And I think we recognize this on a daily basis now that we're older. It's like, oh damn, what do I have to do now? What am I have to healing now? What am I going to have to heal inside of me now? It's an ongoing revelation.
Okay, I just want to say something back to you to acknowledge what you were just sharing there, which is crucially important. How could it possibly be that a child recognizes injustice unless they come from a place where it's absent or uncommon?
Like, what the hell? I love that phrase. What the hell? What the hell? Well, yes, and that's what the dead taught me. I think the reason that I ended up being a spokesperson for dead people is because I didn't have a lot of dead people around me growing up as a child. I didn't have a lot of loss. There were animals that I lost, but I didn't have people. I didn't have a lot of people losing me or me losing people. All my grandparents were dead by the time that I was born. So that dynamic was so interesting because I had no context around the grief of losing someone. But if we start to look at our families, Darren, there is this huge deprivation of love. And that's what creates the trauma in their lives. And that's one of the reasons that I've been in my own laboratory exploring the nature of consciousness surviving death, how that is much more prevalent now than it's ever been, understanding it. But I'm boiling it down into a science conversation, which does not take the love away in any way, shape, or form, does not take the specialness away of life, but it's information that we are all able to tap into because it's information.
Yeah, every time you speak, like I have 8 things in my mind, like it just awakens these little flowers, right? And I've been fascinated by death since I was very young. Um, some might have called me morbidly fascinated. In a sense, if death were a woman, she's been my girlfriend since I was little.
Oh, that's a quote. That's a good quote. Write that one down. That's the title of your book.
Death was my girlfriend. Um, and
I
I
try
think
to revive her all the time.
I was always chasing her skirts, you know? Um,
Or
um,
her spirit.
yes, indeed. So there's a few things I want to say here. First is just autobiographically, I don't remember exactly when I was introduced to the writing of Edgar Allan Poe, but I was hyperlexic as a child. So I was reading adult books very early, and we had some Poe on the shelf, and I was absolutely fascinated with it. I've just recently finished memorizing The Raven for probably the third time in my life. But
Wow.
where I want to go here is weirder. Um, Over the past perhaps 10 months in conversations with a number of people, including a young woman who was recently paralyzed in a car accident, and I have her permission to speak about her situation, just to be clear. Um, I began to think very differently about death. And also, it's quite common for me to take what humans think and just flip it around.
Mhm.
I just invert that thing. And by the way, this happens to be common in science as well. Often we will get the wrong idea, we'll get it backwards first, and then we'll do like a 180 and have like an aha moment. One example of that is one of our clients in my scientific editing business was writing papers about osteoclasts and osteoblasts. These are the cells that build and tear down bone.
Mm.
And obviously, the scientists started out with the bias that it must be the builders that are. This is actually relevant to death and life. It must be the building cells that have, they're the smart ones. They tell the other cells what to do, and they build things. They're obvious. The maker's got to be the good, the best thing. So we presumed that sort of the precedence of effectiveness and capacity and intelligence was on the cells that build them. And so we wrote papers for 10 years as if this were the case. And then suddenly, to everybody's surprise, they discovered that the things that build stuff are essentially just robots following the instructions laid down by the cells that tear a bone down.
Got it.
And so what if something like that were going on in life? What if it's not the builders that are intelligent? What if they're following the instructions of death? What if, oh, go ahead. I can see you.
No, no, I'm fascinated by this. Also along those lines, let's just look at let's look at the DNA dynamic here. This has fascinated me for the last couple of years. Um, do you know who Bruce Lipton is, right?
Yes.
He wrote a book, Biology of Belief. So here was Bruce Lipton running around teaching the DNA determinism model to college students in med school. So he had that down, and then all of a sudden he got compelled to look at stem cell research and found out that the outside of the cell, there's a liquid protein. And what do you do on a liquid protein that looks like crystal? It's like Silicon Valley. It's like time watches. You imprint information on those crystals. So the outside of the structure of the cell was a place that was imprinted by the environment. And he was like, oh my God. He had this, come to Jesus moment of understanding that it was not necessarily the DNA that made the whole dynamic. It was the petri dish that you put each cell in, giving it a different way of eating, different way of absorbing. So it became, in my consciousness, the idea of thank you, God, for the many petri dishes that I chose to put myself in. So I left home, got out of there, or even when I was in home, I was in the woods, or else I was in school, or else I was on the stage reading, or in the library. Each place, and for any of our listeners here, each place was an amazing different petri dish that our consciousness would invest us in. And this is where the spirit or consciousness or the dynamic of the acorn, the whole dynamic of having a daemon, everything inside that acorn, that we come in with the cellular structure of not just the DNA, but an experience packet given to us by the consciousness that sent us here in the first place. That experience packet has all the information in there. Maybe you and I have less hair than most people. Then, I mean, whatever, but we got other skills, right? So, but the dynamic of that is the different petri dishes that consciousness, that spirit, that whatever was in that experience packet put us in different situations because we were compelled to go there. And just so people know, especially people in trauma, that they are choosing. Let's say that you're addicted and you have all these issues. Well, there's this opportunity here to choose another petri dish. That in itself is the saving grace of our DNA.
Ah, again, so many amazing insights are flowing into my mind just as I listen to your inspired anamnesis, right? Unforgetting.
Yeah.
And one of them is I've been fascinated by biology most of my life. I have 50 fascinations. It's not a thing.
It's
But
better than 50 Shades of Gray. Is that what you
yeah, well, I've been less explorational in that particular domain, but much to my sometimes regret. But what I was what came to me while you were speaking, and in a way, I have a variety of features that are actively psychic. They're not the same species that you have in practice. Um, but somehow when someone is carrying something that they're incapable of quite articulating, that's what lights up my peculiar like whatever we might call them. I want to be careful about what to call them. But something that occurred to me while you were speaking is that there's this fabulous video which I'll send you a link to later. It's called The Life of a Cell. It's a simulation of what happens on the surface layer of cells. It is absolutely mind blowing.
I love that. Thank you.
And what occurs to me is, what if? So yeah, this is the thing. We think that the DNA is the blueprint, right? Because we're engineers and we make machines.
Yeah.
Um, which, by the way, aren't really or very organic. They're not like organisms. Organisms, a whole produces a whole. There's no parts, right? It's not little parts being assembled, although it can be viewed that way. And what occurred to me about while you were speaking is that the entire ancestral family and what I'll refer very generally to as origin, which are the what we could think of as the divine intelligences, right? They kind of form a membrane around our soul, and that membrane leads us around tropically, right? Attractively, probably electromagnetic, some sort of magic in electromagnetism, which is what the cell uses to negotiate the boundary between the interior and the exterior of the cell. It uses electromagnetism. Well, that's part of the story. It uses structure as well. But what if those divine beings and our ancestors and so on, that what if they are the membrane around our soul and they're leading us into contexts where we can get both the trouble and the bliss that we need to grow and heal and become a light pole?
Well, you just use a couple of really interesting words here. The light pole, there is a experience in the book that I talk about where I have this amazing first impression of having a past life regression with Brian Weiss. I was in the middle of a boat and on my way to Ensenada, Mexico, with Brian Weiss, and I thought I was there to talk to one of the the psychics who happened to work with law enforcement because I was working with law enforcement at the time. This was in the early '90s, and I have an experience that sh I'm not on this earth. I'm actually looking at the earth, and I'm being told that I have to come back, and my attitude was, "Oh, F that. I'm not going back there." But no, I was literally being, um, prepped to come back, and they showed me going back and forth on the United States, light going back and forth, like on the East Coast, on the West Coast. And what happened was, I'm not going to go into the whole conversation about that, but I was cast on Everybody Loves Raymond as a guest star role, and I show up on the set and I go to the assistant director, and all of a sudden this woman runs out of the seats when we were in rehearsal on the sound stage, and she says, "Oh my God, I had a dream about you." And I'm thinking, I am not famous. I'm a guest star on this show. Nobody really knows who I am. And she said, "They showed me you. They showed me you. You were here. You're supposed to." And she pulls out this piece of paper, starts writing on it on a table where we were getting ready to do the table read. And she's drawing the United States. And she said, and she's drawing the back and forth of being on the East Coast and West Coast and light. She says, "You have to pole light." I'm like, "Pole light? What the hell does that mean?" I hadn't even started pole dancing at that time in my life. It wasn't any, I had no idea what this meant. But she basically recounted my past life regression that I had had in the bottom of a boat with Brian Weiss. It was right there. I don't even remember this woman's name. I write about it in the book, but the dynamic of this was the idea of being like a flagpole for information.
Yes. Yes, this brings up another astonishing thing, which is that from my side of my own experience, it feels, well, I think, because I'm sort of used to thinking this way, that I'm doing something amazing, right? I'm doing this amazing thing, right? When I when I can sort of recover from within someone else
Yeah.
something. And actually what's often going on is that I'm seeing features of myself that have been occluded through them. But the thing that struck me about what you just said is, you know, if somebody's ever experienced hypnosis,
Mm.
right, they're likely to naturally think that the hypnotist has this sort of supernatural power, right? The power's in the hypnotist. When in fact, uh, there's a big truck outside making some squeaky noises. But when in fact, what's going on is it's in the person in trance. And wouldn't it be strange to discover that what we might think of as, for example, me being psychic, is actually the response to the psychism of others that lights us up. That, like, somehow what we're doing is actually being done to or through us by this intense charge around another person. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love that because the nature of trauma is it's a vibration, it's a frequency that we as children are internalizing.
Mm,
It's not necessarily what's outside of you, it's what happens inside of you. It's like what Gabor Mate says, who is an expert in trauma. It's the dynamic of what your response is to what's happening inside of you. It's not necessarily the trauma itself, it's what it's doing to the inside of your cells. It's how you are percolating, how you are responding, whether you are responding in a submissive, fright, or a frightened way. It's your response inside the body. So it is a frequency, right? So this frequency makes a lot of us hypersensitive. So it's like if you had a guitar right now and I had a guitar and I plucked one of the strings, that exact string on your guitar would vibrate.
mm,
So it to me, it is an ongoing process of being pulled to a certain vibration in order to heal it. That's why many of us are drawn to a partner that is similar to one of our parents, where we have to work out some of those dynamics. And it's usually the person with the most pathology that we are drawn to.
yeah,
You know, I mean,
yeah.
it's interesting. I understand the incoming, president because I understood my mother's pathology as a narcissist. I've never hated that, individual. I understand the problem behind it. So that made me, that keeps me compassionate on a bigger level about pathologies.
Mhm.
N n
Oh yes, me too.
Okay, so around this resonance, we are pulled to the resonance. We're also, psychically being shown, sometimes it's because when I work with somebody, I'll just sit on that sofa over there, and I will see things. I don't know what I'm seeing. I'm tapping into the information of the person that I'm working with. So I can feel a wound that happened in when they were 4 or 12 or 18 or 21, which is the inception of the wound, um, Darren, that helps me understand and helps the person that I'm working with go, "Oh, yeah, that happened way back then, but they're still dealing with it right now." So they're having that, as we would call it, the cosmology effect of the family dynamic that is still coming in. And it's not to be judgmental of it, it's just to look at it. It's just to bear witness to it.
Mhm,
Because if psychologists and therapists do this all the time, and I work with a lot of them because they are actually getting downloads and they don't know what to do with the download, whether it's a dead person or it's their own awareness. They are accessing information about the person that happened a long time ago. But one of the things that I've learned in my older years is that the information that I get that seems like, "Oh, I got a sign here, I got a sign here, I have to do something about it." No, it's just a sign.
mm,
So it's kind of like the dynamics of chunks of my life where I went, "Oh my God, this is so amazing. This is a sign. I have to be with this person." Well, the information is being delivered to me. That doesn't mean that I have to marry them. That doesn't mean that I have to do something. It's just, oh, let's just look at it and go, oh, isn't that interesting?
This is part of what we are trained toward in meditative traditions, right? You don't have to change anything. Observe, sense it, be there, be present. Um,
Do I need this? Do I need this? It's here for a reminder. It's here for an awareness. It's here for us to possibly, as you and I are discussing, so that someone else might listen to this and go, oh, yeah, I'm dealing with this right now.
I'm reminded again by our proclivity to transform as if we are like a vibrating shape, right? We are like a thing that is going in and out and it's changing how it's shaped. And then someone comes along and says or does something and we change.
Morph, we morph.
Yeah, we morph. This is particularly obvious to me in one of my practices, which is I do Tai Chi pushing hands. So this is where you're very intimate with someone, your hands are on each other's body, and they're playing with your balance, right?
Yes, yes, I understand.
And the moment that someone puts their hand on your body, especially with men, you know, men are very competitive, the urge is to tense up, right? To try to resist. And what you learn over time, which is a very difficult and counterintuitive thing, is not only to not tense, but to release. And a really good release is unstoppable. Weirdly, it doesn't make any logical sense. But a really good release, when someone pushes on you, they fall over. Um,
Mhm.
so I was just noticing how when we come into contact with each other, there's sort of signals or energies are transferred, and we both change shape, right? And then we sort of evaluate that shape changing. Oh, yes, this is the person I'm supposed to marry, or get that away from me, or all these things. There are intelligences there. Um, to I just want to circle back briefly to death. It has recently occurred to me that the idea. Not, I'm not trying to say what is true, but perhaps what is useful or interesting. That much, and this could change throughout our life, right? Like in the beginning, it might be our birth that's influencing us. But then at a certain point, maybe it flips around and we're being informed from after our lives,
Mhm.
right? It occurred to me at some point that perhaps our affinities and disaffinities, what we desire and what we reject, right, are actually death, our future death dripping back into this moment, right? The wisdom, the perception from beyond this life leaking back in time into us now. And I found that such a fascinating thing to play with. Um, I About your experience, there's a few questions I want to ask you before I lose track of them. And one of them is the peculiar relationship of time to your sensing and the intelligence that you use in your work. Whatever you might like to say about that, I'd be fascinated to hear.
Well, the caveat of how I work is this. I am able to access information for your highest good. That is my intention.
Mm,
One of the things that we were talking about regarding what we wanted to talk about is the power of intention. So let's just do a little matrix conversation to make everything sort of neutral so that it's not organized religion, so that it's not about necessarily belief system, but let's just go down the road of this is the computer. We're in a simulation, a reality, it's a reality frame. We're in a game, we're playing this game. Um, and just the idea that we're here for a certain amount of time. We have these tools that come with us, like Super Mario Brothers or whatever it is, and we get to move into this. So it has been my awareness. And it's funny because, you know, our phones that we deal with all the time, it's like we look at this phone and go, oh, all this information, blah, 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 blah. But what if that was the system that's working with us? What if this we are in a computer simulation? What if this is, you know, what this is a system? You know, when we play solitaire on our phone, I'm always amused by this because I'm playing a game and then I don't necessarily know what to do in this situation. And there's a hint button and it jumps up and down. Move this card here, move that card there. And I'm like, oh, my excuse me, need. I was in trouble. I needed something. I asked the system for it. It
Mm,
gave it to me. I
mm,
liken to say that that's kind of how I work with my life, and this is how I help others see that their intention around getting some assistance is always delivered. Maybe not the way you want it, but actually how you need it. You know, people want money. Oh, if I could just get a chunk of money, blah, blah, blah. Well, you get an opportunity for a job that you might not necessarily like. But if you look at that job, then the money is right there. Excuse me. And you might have to do something you didn't necessarily want to do, but it's like, oh, it's right there. I have the opportunity. So I've been given what I've asked for. But we have this weird thing inside of us as children, which it's like, "Mammy, mammy, mammy. I want it this way. I want it that way." So there is this juvenile person that shows up. Oftentimes, excuse me, someone will ask me, Marla, how old are you right now when you're speaking? And you know, a dear friend, and I'm like, 10. And I will say to my clients too, can we just grow you up to 30 in the next 30 minutes? And we look at it as the opportunity to go, oh, okay, we've got some wisdom here. So the timing of seeing something in the future, we are really quantum leaping something, Darren. We are seeing something in the future that could really be right here, right now. We just attach the photons, the filaments. It's like driving around going, just get me the best parking space. I intention it and then I collapse the wave. Oh, there's the parking space. It's our, it's our, it's the need that we have to be present to what we need, asking for what we need, and it coming to us. So I might work with someone and I see something, you know, like I spoke to someone the other day that said, well, I wanted to work with you again because you did say that John would be having a challenge in January. And when I worked with you 2 years ago, I thought it was that January. And I said, I don't remember. It's information for you. And she said, well, it was the next January when he actually did pass. And she said, but I had the awareness that you had the awareness. So I was present for it. I was prepared on some level. So intrinsically, we do feel these things. Unless we are actively searching for it, we might not find it. So when you talk about a time frame and like time, I need to see time in a linear fashion
mm,
for the way that I work
mm.
because I'm interested, it's my intention to bring information in for your highest good. So if we're looking at a job, someone might see that they have a window, a framework for a window, but we're always opening different windows and different doors. I usually am shown information that doesn't come at you like this. It comes from underneath,
Mm, yeah,
and
familiar as well.
which is really interesting because it's not what anybody was thinking.
Right.
It's just seeing it from a different perspective. Instead of the fear, ooh, you know, all the chaos, I love to look at the lowering the entropy, which is heart centered. Forget the chaos. It's like fumes. It's like gasoline fumes. That can make us sick. But if we reduce the chaos into being low entropy, into being heart centered, then maybe our awareness is no longer about fear. It's about, what's possible here? Hmm. So we get curious. That's basically, I think I want to call my next book Curious. Um, it very well may be that that is a choice that will present things to us because we're asking for it. And we're looking at being curious. So the dead thing, excuse me, the dead person conversation is not about fear because we've done it many, 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 many times. And the weird thing is, and I'm saying this for whoever is listening to this, it's an odd thing that happens to me. When I know that a friend is on death's door, I always start to feel the energy and the joy of them leaving the body because they're going to be free. It's most of the time that when people are sick, I can feel that the legacy of them being in joy or being in relief is going to happen soon. So I take that legacy and I'm like, I'm going to live the best I possibly can because you've taught me so much. I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. And sometimes I don't know that they're dying. And it just happened this last week. I felt a girlfriend of mine that I'd not spoken to in a while. I sent her something about a week and a half ago. I wanted to connect. I wanted to bond. I wanted to hear from her. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to be in communication. It was on me. And I just decided to go to her Facebook page because I hadn't heard back from her since I sent her that email a week and a half ago. And she had died 2 days earlier than me going to her Facebook page. I felt that with a man who was who was a therapist and we used to talk about relationships, and he would always contact me in the next relationship that he was going to be in. And I could feel that he was in another relationship, and I felt it for months and I didn't feel good about it. And I thought, this is so weird. And I went to his Facebook page and he had passed 2 months earlier. So what most people aren't really paying attention to, this is how my life is. So just as a reminder, as you inspire me with that psychicness that happens between people, this is how I live, right? So if we can inspire listeners or people who are watching this to just start to think and be curious about, why am I thinking about Bob? I better look at Bob. I better contact Bob. And maybe Bob is in trouble. Maybe Bob's having a great experience, but to be curious about why we are thinking about Bob and sending Bob love, which is the
Mm.
best we can do. I mean, I think about my friend who died, and I just am so grateful. I mean, she was a major contributor to theater, and she had a mind that was so amazing. And she handled, handling businesses and opening grants and all of these things that she was capable of. And I could feel that coming through in my communication once I knew that she was on the other side. I'm like, okay, let's open the door. And she started telling me what not to do, how not to feel, what I was going through, just as how she would be in life.
Mm.
Because the issues that we have as humans stay with the tissues in death. So consciousness moves forward. There's no more pathology. Imagine being in trauma because your mother, your father used to beat you, or whatever it is. That stays in the body. The awareness and the memory of that goes into consciousness, but it's not the same thing. It's wanting to heal. It's wanting you and I to go forward and talk to a friend about losing a friend. It's literally, it all boils down to the love. I'm sorry, that was a huge download, but that's really what it's all about. It's all about the love.
There's no need to apologize. We're totally here for that. I'm here for that. Exactly whatever you have, I've signed on. All right. So yeah, no need for that.
We signed on years ago, and
Yeah, we
I'm
did.
thrilled that you just got back in touch with me, so thank you.
Oh, yeah, it was timely, quote unquote. Um, you know, I doubt that among my listeners we're going to find hard skeptics, right? Probably just not. Those people are not commonly listening to my podcasts. Um, but there might be people who. Okay, yeah. Here's another thing I want to turn around. We have these ways of talking about existence and life and death. So, for example, we say, well, we're all connected. I think it's kind of the opposite of that. We're actually one thing distributed into, like the same way these fingers, they're not connected, they're the same thing, right? They're one thing in different aspects. Um, and similarly, we think, well, this is hilarious. Um, there's a bunch of things that I find confusing, and one of them is that minds are for thinking. Because it seems to me that what minds are actually for is intimacy. They're for coming together and becoming communal, right? Like linking up. And so the thinking is sort of a symptom of what happens when we're isolated, right? Rather than what minds are for, which is what the sort of waking mind would like us to lead. No, minds are for thinking. Make these little objects, you manipulate them correctly, and it's an engineering task, right? Make the map and fill it in and get all the things correct. There's a place for that, right? There's a little piece of the pie where that's the right thing to do, but most of the pie is actually about intimacy, unforgetting, insight, learning, development, healing, love, growth, remembering, literally remembering. And again, there's another question that I have for you about time. I think we're trained to think about time, think in ways that might be somewhat confused. Um, Did it ever occur to you that time might be a being or an intelligence?
Well, I think of everything as consciousness.
Hmm.
So if I look at life as this is all a reflection of consciousness and growing, all the weird things that we got really interested in, like UFOs and UAPs, we can talk, I do want to talk about that. But all
Yeah.
of that is to inspire our consciousness to expand. I mean, it's hard to think about the Colosseum. It really wasn't that long ago that people were, bloodlusting over people fighting in the Colosseum. And there's a faction of consciousness that is still bloodthirsty.
Hmm.
And that's a level of consciousness.
Hmm.
Uh, we all go through these experiences that teach us things. And oftentimes, death and illness is what makes us go inward and start to feel and think and have so much pain. And that way, we start to reach outward. This is what was happening to me as a child. This larger consciousness system that most people call God, or spirit, or the universal consciousness, saw my trauma, saw my upset. I was screaming and praying before I knew what prayers were. I mean, I have memories from the sense of being born. I have memories at such young age because I was supposed to remember. Some people don't remember their childhoods because it's not helpful.
Hmm.
But here we are, and consciousness is what we are. So these avatars, we could just go to the avatar conversation. This is an avatar. Consciousness comes in. I've talked with scientists and people who are consciousness experts. The consciousness of a child doesn't necessarily come into that child. Maybe not until, I don't know, the 6th or 7th month. There are lots of questions around all of it. I mean, we don't put children in freezers because we know that they would die, but a zygote or an embryo that has been fertilized is in the freezer because that's what keeps them alive.
Hmm.
You don't have there's lots of ways to think about how the cell, the structure, the being, the baby, there's so much going on around, consciousness around embryos or babies, etc. but so many babies opt out, and there are miscarriages. Probably, I know women that miscarried numerous times before they would ever have the child, and that
Mhm.
might be something wrong in the body of the female. It might be something wrong in the environment of where that consciousness is coming in going, "Hell, this doesn't look as good as I thought it was gonna. I'm not staying for this."
Mm.
Or something wrong with the child inside the mother. It's like, I'm leaving. I'm going to come back. I'll come back in the family another time, but it's not time for me to come in. I mean, there's lots of ways to think about this stuff that people are judging others and need to be right about this or that, when in fact, we have to be curious.
Yes.
We
Yes.
just have to be curious. And it's my experience in death that if there is a desire from the consciousness of a dead person that wants to make amends somehow or talk to their living relatives, they will find me and they will put me in front of someone. It's not them looking me up and reading my book or anything like that. No, it's me standing in a line at Trader Joe's talking to this tall, skinny guy that kind of looked like he was having a rough time, and he was. This is a true story about Alec, who basically was standing in line right before the pandemic. We didn't know whether to wear masks, but I said, "You look like you need a jacket." I could feel like I was a mother presence. And he said, "I'm just having the worst time. My mother and father have both died. They died of a certain kind of lung cancer, and I've just been ravaged by thinking about their death, and my wife is going to have a baby." And I said, "Well, let's talk about it." He actually said, "I've been thinking about talking to someone about it." I'm like, "Hmm." So we were on a bench and we were waiting 40 minutes, and he tells me things, and I said, "Well, I'm actually a good person to talk to about this." And I explained who I was, and he said, "Well, I'm interested in this." And I said, "Well, I can feel the presence of your mother." So I'm tapping into the presence of someone that he wants to talk to. And I can feel her coming to me, and I'm like, "Okay, do you wanna go there? Because I can feel this." So I spoke from his mother's perspective, and I could feel her looking through my eyes. Now that's the information of this deceased mother. That's the information of the father that's deceased. But they came in as a benevolent source to help their son prepare for the birth of the child. And they did it in such a loving way. Like, the mother would talk about him being a musician and talk about the fact that he shouldn't be eating gluten, all of these wonderful, weird things. And the father was saying, "Yeah, I'm playing golf on a Utica golf course." And apparently that's where they lived and that's what they used to do together. I don't, I never know what I'm hearing or seeing or feeling. At the time, I'm just listening. But what actually happened, Darren, and I bring this up because this is this is this is the depth of how consciousness that survives death wants to continue to love their loved ones. They came in, they gave him this support, they gave him this love. And what happened was, he calls me 5 months later, the baby is born, and then he says, "And Marla, I'm so glad I had that communication with my parents trying to help me get strong, because my wife has been diagnosed with the same lung cancer that both of my parents died of." And so we spent the next year working together as a family. They lived near me, getting prepared for this woman's death,
Mm.
as he had to take on the responsibility of raising that daughter himself. And so there's a reason, there's a season, there's a reason for the season. But the idea that you have these, we all have fanciful awarenesses. Just my talking to you about this, my friend, will inspire and build that bridge to the deceased as well as the living, for you to be able to have a conversation with someone like me or not, or your own conversation with consciousness, to explore your connection. And it's all about the love.
So there's something that's been spinning in the back of my mind, and it just resurfaced. Um, it's one of those things that we might have backwards.
Mm.
We say, consciousness survives death. It's actually, we got the opposite problem. Consciousness is not surviving life, right? The consciousness is problem with it after death,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
doing
yeah.
fine over there.
Yeah, yeah.
The problem is over here. And so you're like midwifing the reintrusion of the consciousness that it does, we have this backwards. We think like, well, when you die, you're dead, right? The consciousness dies. No, it's the opposite. Consciousness dies when you're born, right? It dies into incarnation, and that's what requires the healing and the light pole to bring the light that's obviously out there before and after birth, right? Back into life and reawakening it here.
It's quite a process. When we see a flower bloom, when we see someone caring for another, which is really what this whole cycle is. We lose our way when we don't think of others. We lose our way when we don't care about others. We lose our way when we think that the trappings of things are more important or our bank account is more important. I gave up a career, really financially successful career, because I could not pretend anymore. I had to leave that world. It was more important to me. It was an agent called me one day and said, what happened to you? And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, you missed another callback. This is the second time in the last couple months. And a callback for most people would understand that it's the actual opportunity in front of directors and producers to get the job. It's a very big deal.
Right.
She said, what were you doing? And I said, I was talking to the president of Toyota and his dead father. Excuse me, I just burped. And she said, well, you need to make a decision. You need to make a choice. And I did at that point because I realized that what was happening in healing, Darren, between the deceased father and this man who was president of this company was more important than whatever the job was that I wasn't thinking about.
Absolutely. Um,
There was a healing taking place.
yeah, I mean, you spoke in your book of this thing that I think is probably extremely unfamiliar to most Americans. This activity, if you will, a kind of healing called psychic surgery.
Yeah.
None of us would, we moderns would be very unconvinced about, if any of my listeners were skeptical of something we're talking about, they'd surely be skeptical of that. But the
Well,
story that you told was completely convincing to me. Not that it's my goal to see, this is the other problem with thinking.
hmm.
We're inclined, particularly men, although women may have their own way of doing it, and I'm not, I can't speak for them. I'll let women speak for themselves.
Yeah, good idea.
Thank you. I mean, my mother taught me this a long time ago. Like, hey,
Oh my
Derek,
God. Okay, yeah.
yeah. But we're inclined to dismiss things that we find a way to invalidate or that aren't true, right?
This, yeah.
Let me just be really clear about something. Most of insight doesn't have to do with what's true. It has to do with seeing better.
Mhm.
The entire realm of science fiction, which were the sort of mothers and fathers of my mind, those authors, they weren't talking about what is true or not. They were talking about seeing, right? And psychism is a way of seeing, if we call it that. It's amazing. Part of your life and how you're in the world that I honor and absolutely trust has nothing to do with my intellect. It has to do with my heart.
Mhm.
So it's not a matter of, are these descriptions true?
Yeah.
And we're often, men particularly, like, if someone says something to us and we can immediately see a flaw,
Mhm.
we just throw that away. Ah, that's not right. I know what's right, and blah 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 blah. And that aspect of of thought is not trustworthy. Again, there's a tiny scope of reality in which it's useful, but what if it takes over the whole scope? You get something like the incoming president,
Mhm.
right? Which is really a dangerous thing. And I see you midwifing, like your soul retrieving people's spirits and their relationships and their physical health, their emotional well-being. You are organizing the context sort of outside of time in a way, or outside of ordinary linear time, even if you have to think in linear time in order to do what you're doing. You're sort of reorganizing these things, not for them, but with them, um, in a way that removes occlusions, right? So that flow and healing and love and memory and recognition. And also, I think you also flip some things over, right? The whole death idea. No, those people aren't gone. They're gone over here. They're not in a body right now. They're right with. I can see them with you, right? Just like they were standing there. Um, so it also occurs to me that this idea of psychism is kind of confused because it's almost like the opposite thing is going on. Everything is like that, and we're pretending it's not. And so psychism is some special supernatural thing, right?
Well, right. I agree with you. There's a need that I have to make the paranormal normal.
Mhm.
And that might take the flashiness and the specialness off of all of it, but I really wanna I need to tell you guys that anybody that's listening to this is how what a snarky little skeptic I was about all of this. Talk about skeptical. I mean, there were things that were happening to me, in childhood that were bizarre, and, I started to pay attention to a couple of stuff, but it wasn't like I woke up and started seeing dead people all over the place. No, 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 no. In fact, I was so snarky about it that when it actually did happen to me, I took myself to all the therapists that I could, took myself to clergy, took myself to doctors, and it happened because I was being stalked. That stalking dynamic and it blowing the antennas out of my head was was the event that made me be in this dynamic of hearing from a dead woman who's telling me that who my stalker is and all of that, that's what was happening. And I literally thought I was really losing it. But the psychic part of this was that I was led because my heart was, which is 50,000 times stronger than the brain, actually. It is the heart that was pumping and asking for help. I mean, praying, whatever, get me some help here. And I saw James Von Prague on television. And I got a call on the phone with a girlfriend that says, I can't get together with you this weekend. I'm going to see James Von Prague and I'm going to be in whatever the conversation was. And I said, is he the gay guy with the mustache that thinks he's talking to dead people? And she said, yeah. And I'm like, I'm watching him on TV right now. So I went to see him and I went with this snarky attitude. But you know what? I thought, okay, it's here. I'm just going to embrace it. I'm going to go in there. Maybe I'm an investigative reporter, maybe I'm whatever. I'm snarky, whatever. But after 2 hours of listening to him, and the things that were happening and looking for the plants in the room. Oh, they're going to raise their hand and they're going to have this thing. I mean, I went through it all, but I was so moved that I got home and got down on my hands and knees and said, I don't know what this talking the dead business is, but can you help me? And help me with that stalker. And, I got answers, and I was led to the US military psychic spies, to the remote viewers who were calling themselves psychic spies, who were basically doing all of this work, and they were in the government, and they were in the faction of the government from the '60s to the '90s, and I'm like, "Oh my god, now I'm being trained by these guys." Thank God I was, because it was a group of men and women that had awareness that the psychic functioning of all of us is not paranormal, it's normal. And I want to throw this conversation into the UFO thing because when I was with James, I started volunteering for him. Because I didn't really think I was, gifted in this way until he put me in a class, and that was another thing. But I was in Sedona with him, and I was being snarky and nasty. Well, I want to go out there and see these UFOs. And I was like, I spent all this money on these clothes. I better see some critters. And I went out there, and the guy handed me a Russian night to vision goggle thingy, and I was looking up, and I saw this dome-shaped skirt thing, and I'm like, "Oh my God, there's a UFO over there." And I started scratching the lens of the thing to make sure that there wasn't a picture on it. And I'm telling you, we lost time. This goes back to the psychic surgery thing. We lost time. I don't remember what happened after that. James and I talked about this years ago. We don't really know what happened that evening. We ended up in a bar. So those things were expanding my consciousness. The UFO dynamic, the psychic surgery thing was expanding my consciousness. And to tell your listeners or viewers about the psychic surgery, I was in a room with a bunch of people. There were a lot of mediums in the back sending energy to this guy who wasn't John of God. He was Dr. Fritz. I think he was a World War I German soldier or something. I don't remember doctor. Can't remember right now. I'd have to look it up myself. But
Mm.
he touched something inside of me, and I felt he was inside my body. It was weird. And then he moved his hand, and I heard like a vacuum seal. And he moved on to the next person. And we got out of that room, and I saw this scar that looked like a scar. So he had done something. And what happened to me was I could feel people walking in front of me. That third chakra was open, and I could feel people, and it was annoying. And it was a really interesting, painful, but an experience. But the UFO thing is another dynamic, and I just want to touch on this briefly, if you don't mind. Um, I still am in touch with people within the UFO community. And Chris Bledsoe has become basically the father of UAP dynamic UFO because it's an ongoing presence that he is doing every single day at his home and other places now. But Chris Bledsoe's book, UFO of God, has been out, and it's in different languages. And I met him 2 years ago when this was really coming to fruition. And I was a part of that with him at the Monroe Institute. I'm so fortunate that I've had this experience, and he actually mentions me at the end of the book. But the point is, he is an ongoing experiencer of pulling in these energies. And daily in the nighttime, there's video after video of him on um, Instagram. The people of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch have gotten a hold of him. So many of your listeners might know about this, but he is an ongoing exploration of consciousness showing up. And here we are, and we must be ready for it, Darren, because it's here. And it's a daily dose of information that can't be denied, that has not been balked by science, where science is basically embracing this and saying, well, here it is. What are you,
Yes, of
what are you
course.
going to do with it?
Over the past perhaps 2 years, I think particularly since David Grush came forth to the IG and did his like 18-hour presentation and appeared before Congress and so forth. And then people like Diana Walsh Pasulka and Jacques Vallée, who lives here in the
Yep,
city.
absolutely.
My roommate built his website and has had some back and forth with Jacques. Gary Nolan, and then some of the older names, I could sprinkle them on the
Sure,
cake.
of course.
But so one of the things I just want to mention quickly, so that it doesn't get lost, is I actually had a moment of like a surprise when I was reading your book. and you use the acronym UFO to refer to unknown family of origin.
Exactly.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant. So
Well,
here's something I
the
want
context, but the context of that, just so we stick to the context of this whole thing.
to.
I was in a meditation at the Monroe Institute, and I went to a special place on the other side at a level, certain level that Monroe teaches. And it was John Mack who wrote Abduction. He was the clinical psychologist that had been part of this UFO conversation that was in this house that I ended up going into. And he says, welcome. This is the place where you can come in. And he says, and I'm here to teach you about UFOs and family of origin. I'm like, oh my God. And of course, John Mack is dead, then he's talking to me. So I just want to give the context before you go on. So,
Yes, absolutely. So this is a topic I've followed since childhood, like probably 5 or 6. I read Chariots of the Gods when I was 7. So I was a little kid, and it impressed me very deeply. Also, it was very clear to me as a child, we have this feeling of injustice and so on, and like, what do the humans do? The adults are out of their minds. What are they doing? And so it at least occurs to some of us children that there must be something actually intelligent somewhere, right? There must be an actual intelligence somewhere. And the sky is the obvious place to imagine it being, especially if you've read a few hundred science fiction stories like I had by the time I was 12 or whatever. In any case, this is another thing I think that humans are very confused about, and I just want to say a few things about it. I won't lecture, I promise. Um, it's really weird the way we're taught to think about being human, because whatever we might be, the human portion is like this part of my pinky. Okay. We first are, time space itself is expressing itself as organisms and worlds and stars and beings, right? It's not like humans spring up in a vacuum and we're the important thing, right? We are an extension like a finger on the hand of being. And so somehow we've been trained to think differently, like our thinking is really important, or we're the important thing. And there are ways in which we are important. I'm not dismissing those. But it occurred to me when speaking with Amber again, I had the most astonishing vision. And as you know, uh,
yes.
although I haven't, I don't generally speak at length about this, but I think we spoke somewhat about it in previous conversations. I had like a 9-month non-ordinary experience that was absolutely mind-shattering. And during that experience, I had the experience of being psychic. I could look at someone, know their name, see their childhood, if they were injured, if they had a health condition, who was going to die, when they were going to die, these kinds of things, and many, many other things. It was like being in a school all day, every day with NHI. And I don't talk about this a lot. I prefer to talk about what I learned. But one thing that became blatantly obvious to me was
Mhm.
that what if the ancient humans were actually a vehicle for the embodiment of NHI, and there was sort of a developmental intimacy where they could experience physical embodiment, which is alien to them, and we could experience the transcendental intelligence, which is natural to them. And all of this has been forgotten, and now we think there are gods and the aliens and da da da. The most alien thing in the universe is humans. Let me be really clear about this. We are alienated from pretty much as a species from every form of life. What we do in laboratories makes what we think aliens do during abduction look like kindergarten, like Play-Doh, like playing playful games, right? Think of what we do to the animals in laboratories for research. I mean, it's just, what are we thinking as a species? Of course, there are enlightened individuals, and there are even enlightened, relatively enlightened cohorts of humans. We're not all bad, but at the group level, when our humanity and our sense of origin and intelligence is evacuated and we become mechanical, right? Like that story that you told of your previous existence in that girl in the laboratory in a Nazi camp, right? So I think we're really confused. And I think we belong to time space. NHI and us are the same thing. We're just thinking about it in a very peculiar way because it tends to be distant from our common experience.
Yes, and man, I'm not saying man, the physical sex necessarily, just man in general, man, woman, man. There is this sophistry of needing to be right, and fighting for this weird ego anomaly that I learned in Landmark and in parts of Est, where there is an image that is created, which will defend your ego, defend you, defend it's a false representation of you, but it will defend you to the death. It would rather be right than wrong. When we talk about the cosmology, when we talk about our history, we as the United States of America, we've got some problems, coming from another country, invading, killing all the Indians, uh, corralling them into a disexistence. What's the word? Extinction. Excuse me, I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at myself not being able to pull a word in.
Mhm,
Um, but the extinction of the indigenous people so that a group of frightened people, frightened white people, came
mhm,
over here and just decided to do this, and then decided to buy other people to build the country as opposed to themselves building it. They bought other people in order to do that. And it is, I mean, there is something really, well, it's there's a word that I want, and it's not a derogatory word. It's enterprising. It's enterprising in that terminology. But the fact that we don't want to remember our history and what we've done is the problem. The banning of books, which is our history, the banning of stories, which made us who we are. This really is not really possible to do without the annihilation of all humans, because the stories will continue. The stories started in our own families, and and whatever has been shameful in our families has may possibly been wiped out. One of my great great grandmother looked Cherokee, and that would have been really cool to be an Indian, some Indian blood. But no, it's actually slave trader port blood. It's black, and it's down south. It's in my family, and they didn't want to tell that story.
mhm,
So
mhm.
the shame of whatever this is, it's this false sense of self. It's this thing that we have developed to protect ourselves. When in fact, we are seeing it now, and I'm glad we have the opportunity to say it right now. We have to be where we are in order to look at everything. All of us are in the same boat. We might think differently, doesn't matter what religion we're in, doesn't matter. We're just humans. But the point is, we all are here in the United States, and we have to learn what it is to be somebody else. And we're having that opportunity over and over and over and over again. When will we learn?
There's two things right on the tip of my mind. The first one is a joke that I heard that I thought was hilarious related to the most recent election. And someone said, I can't remember who it was, imagine that half the people on the Titanic were pro iceberg.
Yes, imagine that. Imagine that. But in the context of ego, I knew that was going to happen. Well, you get to be right. We're all dead, but you get to be right.
Exactly. Okay, so here's where I want to talk about a feature. My own work is deeply concerned with human cognition, social cognition, and what happens in groups, because I still have that urgent need to highlight and perhaps bring medicine for injustice. Right? I want to know what's the origin of this.
Your
And
family,
say again?
your family, your family,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
your family, how mom and dad treated you, how they treated each other. And you just go there and just have a field day with it.
I mean, actually, to be honest about my family, and I'm sure there's things that I've misremembered, but I had a pretty idyllic childhood, I think. I
That's
did. I had
I'm
a
at
pretty idyllic childhood. Where I encountered injustice was outside my family, in other children, in school, in the teachers, in watching humans kill each other on TV, that kind of stuff. And I mean, there's a joke here. I don't know if it's the right. I'll stay on track for the moment.
okay, good.
So I work with a neuroscientist, and I have for about almost 20 years now. And I've been fascinated with the brain, neuroscience, biology, but particularly the relationship between the two cerebral hemispheres.
Yes, yes, got it.
And so there's this guy, his name is Ian McGilchrist. If you don't know of him, I'll send you a link later.
Okay.
And his thesis is that our cultures are the are like it's as if we've got just a left hemisphere, right? Or now this is a bit disingenuous because the hemispheres are usually always connected, and the right mediates some of the features of what we could think of as left hemisphere character. But here's what I want to say: what has become absolutely clear to me. I'm not saying that. Again, this isn't about truth; it's about seeing. There's a feature that arises in humans in large groups. It despises that organisms exist. It doesn't want there to be any organisms. Those cannot be controlled or manipulated. It wants dead, manipulable, controllable objects. It
Mm,
hates life. It hates intelligence. It wants stupidity. Because, in a way, it's like an inflated protector part in internal family systems talk, right?
mm,
It's terrified that anything can threaten its absolute sovereignty over all phenomenon. And so, literally, it will destroy anything to preserve its dominance,
right,
including itself. It's happy to, it doesn't care even about its own survival. What it cares about is its dominance. And
got it.
this feature, you can see it in the behavior of corporations. You can see it in the behavior of the prison military industrial complex. You can see it in the behavior of nations. You can see it in some behavior.
Organized religions.
Yes, I was just going to say churches, whatever. So this has become a focus of mine, trying to understand the origins of this. And it's very clear that the colonists who came to the United States were first themselves compromised in this particular way. They had been captured by these processes, which are not necessarily evil, but they are kind of dead inside, right? And since they're dead inside, they don't want there to be things that are alive inside. That's a threat to their viability, their authority, their so this is part of the key to the medicine that perhaps we might be able to produce together.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea that we can go to sleep at night and say to the system, show me how to heal what I need to heal, is it's a query into the big cheese, or this consciousness that most people call God. It is a query that will be answered. We don't know how it's answered oftentimes. We might have dreams and we might not remember the dreams, but we wake up and we feel different
Mhm.
and we go about our day in a different way. Or I have an intention for a red sweater and I've been having it in my mind or something, and I go to a store and I see this beautiful sweater draped on a back of a chair, and someone just said, "Oh, that was just returned. You're interested in that?" And I'm like, "Yeah. Let me smell it first." No, whatever it is, but I'll feel it. And and that was just the gift. That was a simple, oh, you need a vitamin. But these are the things that once we are aware that we can ask for, it does come to us. It's nothing, it's nothing less than a miracle in some way that we have this ongoing connection to source. It's that we hate having to grow up. And those of us who are older than 50 happen to have a way of understanding. And because I've been working in consciousness for so long, all of those people, the ones that are alive and people, they are actually doing the best they can.
Yeah.
And It's not about defending that, even they know that they're not doing the best they can. That is actually the best they can do. And if we continue to find a way for us to do the very best we can do, maybe it's going to be inspiring for someone else. I don't know everything. I mean, I'm not walking around, touting the fact that I know things. The fact is, I do have to know on some level, but I'm not going to go down the road of, oh, I knew that. I knew that iceberg was there. Well, it doesn't matter, honey, you're dead.
Yeah.
It wasn't important that you knew it. You couldn't do anything about it. But while we're here and while we have the opportunity to do something about it, I'm going to wrap this up. I choose love.
I choose love too. So when you say you're gonna wrap this up, are you saying we're out of time, or are you saying we're gonna put a little ribbon on that topic?
Kind of both.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I mean, this is an ongoing conversation for me. I mean, I would love that. And listening to your conversation with Amber, I want to be a part of an ongoing conversation. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. That's
This is what usually happens actually, right? We have a conversation and then we're like, when can we do another one? You know?
exactly.
So
Well, that's
I'm all in for that anytime. I will be there, believe it.
yeah.
With
Well,
bells on.
good, that's good because I think that that's the nature of it's not that I have the answer. I literally was put into that family, had those experiences, handled those experiences the best I could. Got really curious about murder because I had 3 murders in my hometown, which is a very small hometown between the ages of 11 and 13. An accident with my horse where I was given a vision right before I had the accident and told how to protect myself so I wouldn't die. I mean, and inspiring other people to pay attention to the history of the trajectories of these sort of miraculous things so that they know they're not alone, so that they know that they can tap into the source, so that they know we are in this together in an experience.
When you spoke about The Matrix, one of my favorite authors who's a madman, and I'm fond of a variety of people who are, unstable. Uh, Philip K. Dick, he wrote this book called
Yes,
Ballast,
yes, yes.
Vast Active Living Intelligence System.
Mhm,
And I just think it's important for us as humans to understand that the humans aren't necessarily the intelligent thing around here. We're very thinky,
mhm.
but there is a system in which we are embedded and from which we arise and for which we exist that's universal. It's not merely human. It's more than human. We are more than human. And when you speak of your own experiences, your gifts, your skills, your surprises in life, the one of the perspectives I would like others to receive from your story is a validation of the vastly more than ordinary that is natural to us. Is your sound still working?
Yeah, I was just whispering. I'm like going, yeah, yeah,
I would like them to have that validation. Okay, it's one final question before we wrap up. What brings meaning to your life these days?
the kindness that others have for each other, for animals. Um, it really boils down to the kindness and the juxtaposition of that, where we wake up on whether it's a Christmas morning or Kwanzaa or, during Hanukkah or something, whatever it is the inspiration of the information that's in memory. And we can love our deceased loved ones. We can find the memories, we can bring those memories to life, that encourages that spark to be felt in another dimension. Before that consciousness moves on and reincarnates, we still have that connection. And when people find that out and they call me and they said, "Oh my God, I just saw my grandma." I'm like, That's fabulous." "Well, I don't know about it." I'm like, "Well, how'd you feel?" "I felt great." Well, it's a surprise, but it's the interesting connections that people make every single day about love.
Mm.
So thank you for this opportunity to reconnect with you and whomever is out here that we can have the conversation with.
Thank you. You are so inspiring. What a beautiful shining soul you are. I love you. You're amazing. I'm so grateful to know you and to be a part of your world. Thank you so much, Marla.
You, Darren. Thank
I choose love too. Bye bye for now.
you. Bye.
Till next time.
Okay.
Bye.